Bob Clanick has visited me a couple of times, making the long drive from London, Ontario. His first visit was to talk about his book, Promo Man, Backstage Tales from the Vinyl Jungle. Joining us remotely, because health issues made it difficult for him to make the trek from London to South Etobicoke, was the legendary Canadian concert promoter himself, Nick Panaseiko. Sadly, I learned earlier today from Bob that Nick Panaseiko has passed away. Here's our lengthy discussion with Nick about him working for Freddie Mercury, Johnny Cash, Keith Richards, Kiss, Rush, Bill Cosby, Liberace, Keith Moon, and others. My sincere condolences to all who knew and loved Nick Panaseiko. Nick, how did you become Promo Man?
Well, it started in, as I say, in lovely London, Ontario, with working at a major record store called the Disc Shop in the Wellington Square. This would be 1964. And I was managing a couple of local bands that I started promoting my own shows using the bands that I managed. But I got turned on to an agent in Toronto called Ron Scribner. And at that time I was looking for a band called Richie Knight and the Midnights, who had a hit with a song called Oh Charlena. And that was in 1964. Well, I got a hold of the group, and they told me that since they had the hit, they were booked solid for the next couple months. So I had to look for somebody else to present a major concert. Ron Scribner talked me into bringing in Gene Pitney, who at that time was riding high from songs like The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance, 24 Hours from Tulsa. So
Town Without Pity.
Gene Pitney in December of 1964, and sent the deposit, got the arena, everything was set. I walked into one of my retail stores, the Bluebird record store that was selling tickets, and they said, in a panic, you've been getting calls from New York, you got problems. So I get on the phone with Ron and find out that Gene Pitney is pulling the date 2 days before the show because he had started getting better offers due to the hits. So here I'm stuck with no band,
right,
with a full-page ad in the London Free Press, and had to look for somebody to replace Gene Pitney. Well, we couldn't get anybody until January. And I ended up booking in a group from Detroit called the Supremes, who were just riding high on Stop in the Name of Love and numerous other hits.
Wow. Okay.
So they came in mid-January to fill in the date. We honored the tickets for Gene Pitney. Unfortunately, there was a major snowstorm. Their drive from Detroit to London was 4 hours plus. When they got there was no time to rehearse, and the manager came out with a stack of charts. Unfortunately, nobody in the backup group, Johnny Stevens and the Canadians, could read music, so the girls end up lip-singing to their hits through the sound system that they used to use for the roller skating in the hall.
So you just played the single
for Milli Vanilli or anybody else.
You just played the single on the loudspeakers, and they just lip synced essentially.
Yeah, and I'll tell you one extra thing. Further to that, recently Nick and I both met the late Johnny Stevens' wife at the London Music Awards the other weekend, and I told her the story about the record, and she had never heard of that. She all she knew was Johnny was backing them up, and it's like, yeah, this is what happened. So.
And I'm just going to point out here, again, this is all audio, but Bob and I have our respective copies of Promo Man. I bet you Bob has more than one. And I got to say, great pictures. Like, I'm looking at a photo here at London Arena. This is from January 16th, 1965. The Supremes, like I don't know who took all these photos? I guess you saved them all, Bob, but...
Well, there's a good answer to that, and it's got two parts. Some of these photos, as you can see, and actually we have we credit them at the front, some of them, like the ones you're looking at, were included from other photographers.
Right.
And this is before Nick met John Rowlands. Now, John Rowlands is a renowned rock and roll photographer. He shot the famous Bowie... what do you call Archer shot? That's his.
Oh, sure. Okay.
Yeah, and he's shot everyone from the Beatles to Lady Gaga. And so Nick hired him around 75 to work for him at Atlantic.
Okay.
At Quality Records. And so John basically chronicled much of Nick's life in the music business. And later, too, and they're still lifelong friends. They
Amazing.
They hang out together all the time. Anyway, but John also provided these and donated these pictures for use in the book, free of charge, for his friend Nick. And so
nice. I mean, I'm looking here. You just flip through, and again, I've read this book, and I have cherry picked some names and artists I'm gonna ask Nick about. But you just flipping through here, it might be Blondie, it might be Johnny Cash. You got David Foster, who comes up a lot on this show. Freddie Mercury, like this. Unbelievable. Like Keith Moon, for goodness sakes. Like these are the big stars we're going to be talking to Nick about today.
Yeah, that's a great story that opens the book about Keith Moon.
Okay, let's start there then. Yeah. Again. Nick, I'm going to ask you about some specific artists and stuff, but if you need to go on a tangent, you got carte blanche to do it. I will just say, in a funny coincidence, that on the last episode of Toronto Mike, I had Scott Turner and I had Brother Bill, and then we have Cam Gordon. We were talking about dance music from the 80s and 90s, and we were talking about like sometimes the legend is what the people need as opposed to the real deal, and sometimes people will ignore the real story in favor of the legend. And then I referenced The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance. It's Print the Legend is in that movie. Yes. So that was the last episode. So it's funny that we now talk Gene Pitney and The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance. But okay, I digress. Tell me, if you can, Nick, about Keith Moon. You did coke with Keith Moon.
Well, we were kind of forced into a situation.
Other duties as assigned, yes.
My friend Gene Liu, who was the director of public relations for Quality Records, hired me, and he opened a club called Cooley's, which is above Sam, the Chinese food man in Toronto. And it was being used mostly by record companies for artist promo nights and so on and so forth. Well, the roadies for the Who threw a final party from their Toronto concert in 77, I believe it was, and Gene invited me up to look after and keep Keith Moon busy talking, because he'd heard some of the horror stories about Keith throwing television sets out of windows and whatever. So when I walked in to the room, it wasn't long before Keith and I were together, and he says, "You've got to find me a spot here because they're watching me." So I wasn't sure what he was referring to, but we went into the employees' washroom, and he pulled out a bag of coke, which I thought he was going to maybe do a few lines. And he says, "We're not leaving here until we finish this." Which is a little bit undaunting, but if you take a look at the picture, when we walked out, John Rowlands happened to be in the back kitchen also, and he snapped that picture, and it definitely looks like drugs were involved. We were all smiles.
That's when you know you're working in rock and roll, right? When you're snorting a pile of coke with Keith Moon. Like, that's as rock and roll as it gets, right?
Yes, indeed.
And Keith, I'm trying to get my timelines right. Like, when does Keith Moon pass? Not too long after.
It was 78. I think I've got it there too. Well, he filmed a One More Thing in 78, and I think it was September 7th of 78. That rings a bell.
Okay, well, I'm just glad Nick didn't go with him. Yeah. We have these great stories. But so you're doing coke with Keith Moon, and otherwise, though, Like I'm trying to get an idea because I've heard he's a bit of an animal. Like other than the the mound of coke he had to do with Keith Moon, what was he like otherwise?
Definitely very mellow, very talkative.
Huh.
We discussed he really liked Toronto, so we had a lot of things in common. And there wasn't much conversation after us being in the washroom, but we had a few drinks and we sat around and, as I said, had an evening like most normal people have.
Okay, I think if what do I know about coke? But if I did a mound of coke like that, I don't think I could sit down. I'd be bouncing off walls, I think. But all right, but now we're going to cover another gentleman who passed away too soon. Another guy who knew how to party. Did I read in this book correctly that you got high with John Belushi?
Yes, indeed. He came into London with the National Traveling and Lampoon show and performed with Fogels, and so we got talking, and he invited me back up to his room at the Holiday Inn in London. Wow. As I said, it was on a sunny Saturday afternoon. I walked into the room, and there was something just wrong with the room. Looking around, and I realized that he's taken a black pool liner, and gaffer tape, and it taped the window shut, so that you can control the space of light and day. So yeah, we ended up getting fairly high. I was amazed he was able to do the show later that night.
I always wonder, like, when you have these moments with these big names like Keith Moon and John Belushi, and then you read in your paper or hear on the radio that they passed away at young ages. Like, Nick, what's your reaction to that? Like, what was your reaction when you heard?
Well, yeah, that's when you take the word moderation out of the sentence and out of play, and you indulge on a constant basis where you need your fix, basically, or whatever it is.
Right. Addiction, absolutely. Now, Bob, again, I'm like a kid in a candy store here.
Go for it.
So I'm just gonna go, but you can take me any direction you want, whenever you want. But here's a gentleman who did not die young, but he did pass away recently. Lived to a nice old age, though. Chuck Berry. What can you tell me about your experience with Chuck Berry, and what was Chuck Berry like?
Well, Chuck, I met Chuck at an early stage in my career. I'm just trying to remember the year now, but Chuck and I hit it off. He performed at a high school auditorium, and after the show, I ended up inviting him back to my house. We ended up coming back to the house. He brought along a young lady, which we found out was 15 and not 18, so we ended up sending her home in a cab. And so that was my initial meeting with Chuck.
Was that one of your duties as well, when you saw, sort of like when I was at a Rib Fest yesterday, and if they think you're close to 19, they want to see ID. So apparently the rule is if you look under 25, let's see some ID, okay? And I always wonder, is that part of your duties? Like, if you can't, if you look like you might be under 21, let's see some ID here and make sure we're old enough to be there.
On the same page, yeah. Well, then, as I say, I got to know Chuck later in life. We had an issue where he was at Convocation Hall in Toronto with George Thorogood opening the show for him. And Chuck always demanded cash payment, while the student body had a $5,000 check for him that he wasn't going to honor and not go on until he got cash. Well, it's a Sunday night. We had to do some brainstorming of who could cash a check for $5,000, and we ended up coming up with Sam Snyderman from Sam the Record Man.
Wow!
And he ended up cashing the check for us, and we paid Chuck, and the show went on.
Wow!
But
and I know you couldn't remember the year, but are we before My Ding-a-Ling or after My Ding-a-Ling?
Oh, after.
After, okay. I think that was 72. Okay. Only I find that Chuck Berry's chart history interesting because he's a legend, one of the founders of rock and roll, and Johnny B. Good, it's still a staple of the rock and roll diet from the 50s, but his biggest hit is a novelty song he records in 72.
So sad.
I know. It's just interesting how that worked for
It's
Chuck.
not even a very good song.
No,
too.
It's a terrible song.
There we go.
I think My Ding-a-Ling is a terrible song. But and imagine comparing, My Ding-a-Ling to Johnny Be Good.
Or Roll Over Beethoven.
Right.
Any of those, right?
Right. And my sweet little 16, is that how the song's called? But which is essentially, if you listen to California Girls by Beach Boys, that is Sweet Little 16. Like, it's the same song.
Okay.
Good
point.
Listen to Sweet Little 16 and then listen to Surfin' USA is the song I'm trying to say. Surfin' USA by the Beach Boys.
Right.
Not California Girls. Sorry. Surfin' USA. Same song. Right, Nick?
I believe so.
And I'm putting Nick on the spot here. Okay. Again, Kid in a Candy Store.
Have fun. This is what it was like talking to Nick when we first heard these stories, and I went, I got to do a book.
All right, so before I get, and I know so many people listening are fans of Kiss and fans of Rush. I know off the top of my head a number of Rush fanatics who are diehard Toronto Mike listeners. So we're going to talk Kiss, we're going to talk Rush, but I want to take a moment just because I'm curious. You were there. What was the music scene like in London back in the mid to late 60s there?
Well, it was the start of Carnaby Street with the Beatles, and of course their opponent was the start of soul music in the Toronto Sound. We brought in bands like the Five Rogues, who ended up being the Mandela, George Oliver, the Sean and Jay Jackson. So London was very vibrant in numerous styles of bands that existed.
Yeah, I was gonna. If I could add something to that too, I just Nick was, and from that side, I did. There's a chapter in the book in which we talked to a lot of young people from the day, and if I could characterize it, it was like everyone had to get their hand on an instrument, and so they would get some from the police band. They would borrow it from the police band, or they were in the police band, or they would, borrow it, and I use that loosely, from the high schools, and also turn the numbers around in the cases. So if the teachers came to see them play, they wouldn't know it was their instruments.
That's funny.
In the case of one guy, Chuck Grover, Chuck he made his own guitar in shop class, and he later became a peer of Robbie Robertson's.
Wow.
To such a degree that not only did Robbie give him one of his guitars, but Robbie, a couple of years ago, wrote a letter to the London Music Hall of Fame just saying Chuck should be in the London Music Hall of Fame. He was that good of a player.
Wow.
Yeah.
Because London's an interesting city in that it's far enough removed from Toronto that you don't get the overlap. I'm guessing in London you can't get 1050 Chum on your radio, can you?
I don't think so.
I don't think so. Like, I feel like you're far enough away that you're not, obviously not GTA, but you're not even influenced. You have your own kind of ecosystem.
Well, and I think, of course, pre-internet, even radio, there were all these regional scenes and regional sounds. It's interesting you mentioned London. Ronnie Hawkins used to winter at the YMCA with the Hawks, because that way they can go north to Toronto, 2 hours, south to Detroit, and they would make it their home away from home.
Well, my buddy down the street who has a Detroit Tigers bumper sticker on his car, I always give him a hard time, and he reminds me he's from London, and he said there are a lot of Tigers fans in London, and he's like, you have to appreciate that.
And until
influence.
the Jays came along, Detroit was a London town. I mean, London was a Detroit
a
town.
Tiger town.
Yeah.
Yeah, and sometimes even if because this guy, I think, was probably around my age, and he's had the Jays around his whole life, but it's the father influence. If your dad's a Tiger fan, he brainwashes you.
There you go. There used to be some little bars in town, like pub bars, that would say "Home of the Detroit Tigers" in London, Ontario, which is kind of funny.
So I give him a pass because he's from London. He can have a Tigers sticker on his.
That's very kind of you, Mike.
Shout out to Alan Trammell and Lou Whitaker, sweet Lou Whitaker, and Jack Morris and the gang there. Okay, I digress. Where am I going next? Before I get back to radio, I want to ask you, because, we've talked about Belushi and Moon, and we know what happened with them, and Chuck Berry, who recently passed away, but was there at the start of rock and roll. What a legend he was. I want to know, Nick, about your experiences with Bill Cosby.
Well, that was a classic because he overwhelmed me at the time. We had a group called the Spinners who were coming off of a hit Rubber Band Man opening for Bill Cosby, which was a little strange having a rock band, soul band opening for a comedian.
Yeah.
But we decided I would give him a nice box of cigars, Cuban cigars. So he ended up opening the box, getting a cigar and calling me over to the side and telling me that next time that he ever performs, he doesn't want the N-Boys opening for him.
So he called these guys the N-word.
Yes.
Wow.
And so I was a little shocked and taken back. And actually, a couple of Spinners wanted his autograph, and he basically slucked them off and wouldn't sign anything for him.
Wow.
You know, it's, again, with his character and what we've learned about Bill Cosby, that nothing surprises me at all. But it's still, because, you know, he is such a symbol of, Black excellence and progress. And then to hear that he would say, I don't want N-words opening my show.
Yeah.
Even now, even knowing what we know, it's disheartening.
And he was kind of the acceptable black face for white America at the time. He and who else? Well, Sidney Poitier.
Oh, yes.
Yeah. So those two were kind of like now Sidney Poitier is apparently a wonderful human being
who just passed himself.
Right, and Bill Cosby was not, as can be seen clear. And I just want to add something. When writing this book, yeah. I did. This says a lot about Nick himself. Nick really doesn't not like many people, you know, and right. he doesn't have many nasty words to say about pretty much anyone. There's only Bill Cosby, and the other one was Van Morrison. Which makes sense, because Van Morrison's always been known as a surly guy, even as I'm a music
even
journalist.
During this pandemic, he had
he's having a nervous breakdown there. But still, no, he was just always known as a surly guy, and that's the only other guy that I ever heard Nick say, something negative about him.
It takes a lot for Nick to say something negative about you, and Bill Cosby passed that threshold, because the name of this chapter 15, is one of the worst acts I ever worked with.
Yes,
indeed.
Wow. Okay, so let's move on from disgraced comedian Bill Cosby. Here's a gentleman. I grew up with this gentleman seemingly everywhere, and then he passed away when I was pretty young, but not too young that I don't remember. But what can you tell me about Liberace?
Liberace was one of the best acts that I worked with, a real sincere gentleman that remembered your first and last name and wanted to know that you had any kids, and acknowledged the hello and goodbyes every time you saw him. So his manager, Seymour Heller, ended up getting me pretty close to Liberace's lifestyle. And of course, they had the trauma when the National Enquirer and other tabloids wanted to break the news about him being gay. And Seymour Heller ended up spending half an hour talking to the editors of the National Enquirer, and they end up coming up with a watermelon diet story. So I don't know how long that stayed, but
wasn't that to do with AIDS, Nick? Because he's getting so thin. Because I remember that he was, that was the idea that they said he was getting thin because of this diet he was on. Does that ring a bell? Yeah. That's
right. Of course, this is an era where, I'm thinking of Rock Hudson now, where you weren't out. It was career suicide to be. Even Elton John will tell you that he stayed in the closet for a long time, and when he came out, he suffered commercially. He was, in the 70s, he was top of the heap, and then he went through a tough commercial period after he came out. It's what kept George Michael in the closet a lot longer than he wanted to be, because he saw what happened to his friend George.
Well, I was going to say that one of the things that comes up in Promo Man at least a couple times, one with Liberace and also with Freddie Mercury, just getting them, keeping Nick would find ways to keep them entertained and bring them to the underground gay clubs in Toronto.
And try to keep it on the down low. Well, let's talk about Freddie Mercury then. Nick, what stories can you tell us about the lead singer of Queen?
Well, with Freddie, once again, I think gay people are definitely courteous, and they seem to have a mannerism about them. Freddie just wanted the word to get out that he wanted to get out to the gay clubs that night, and he wanted to make sure that everybody was wearing either a little leather sailor's hat or a leather vest, because he's into leather at the time. So we took him to a couple clubs along with Gino Empri, who's the publicist for the Royal York. And Gino wanted me to have a dance with him because he said I was a perfect new guy on the block, a new young spring chicken. So I even gave Gino a kiss on the cheek, and I said, sure, Gino, we'll have a dance.
I remember Gino Empri, and I used to work for a guy who was good friends with Gino, and he was a character. He was a character himself. But so it sounds like Freddie Mercury, wanted to enjoy. He wanted you to help him enjoy, his lifestyle, and he didn't want. I suppose he didn't want the attention from the media on such matters.
Yeah.
So similar to Liberace. Okay, so I'm going to now. I teased it enough, but there's, as you know, the fan bases for these two bands are enormous. And these are I would say, passionate, loyal fan bases, unlike most bands. Let's start with Kiss, since they're the American band here. What did you do for Kiss? Tell me about your relationship with Kiss.
Well, Kiss in 1974, I was in Detroit. I was working for a radio station called CJOM-FM that really was out of Windsor, but really catered to the Detroit market. And we got them to come into London on the cable. So I went to see a group called Bullets that ended up becoming the Romantics down the road.
Oh, yeah.
But that same night, there was a group that everybody was talking about, Kiss. So I went to see Kiss, and they were just in their preliminaries with pretty well homemade outfits and whatever. They had 2 huge barrels of dry ice to create the smoke theme, and Peter Chris's drums would be lifted by a forklift truck on a riser. So I ended up wanting to bring them to London, which we did. And, of course, I hired Rush at the time, who were just coming out of doing high school bands.
Right.
So 2 basically unknown groups getting together for a night of entertainment at Centennial Hall in the summer of 74. And I brought Kiss back in December for the phrase that I coined, Merry Kissmas. And I had 4 kids dress up as Kiss. We hired a limousine and took them around London to all the radio stations. We darted in and out. We had a cameraman taking pictures, and the buzz got out that everybody thought the Kiss was in town a week before the concert. So it helped definitely to promote the show for us. But both Kiss and Rush were just coming on the scene at that time. And I think if it wasn't for the Rush teaming up with Kiss, who ended up taking Rush to all the heavy metal states as an opener, I don't think that Rush would have gone anywhere as quickly as they did, or the change that they did. And of course, the first show that they did for me was with John Rutsey, the original drummer.
Wow.
Right. It was the last show he did, wasn't it, Nick? And it was in July. The July 74 show was in London, was John's last gig with the band.
And so this is pre-Neil Peart.
Yes.
Wow. Okay. And I mean, this is where you become a promo man. This is your moment here, because you're helping get Kiss and Rush recognized and on the radio. And that's amazing, because those 2 bands, as you know, as we all know, those 2 bands became huge.
Yeah.
Wow. You're not still buddies? You still friends at all with Geddy Lee and Alex Lifeson?
Really, Rush really wasn't my cup of tea.
What was your cup of tea?
Well, I listened to a lot of metal music. I used to enjoy the Linda Ronstadts, the Emmylou Harris's, the Eagles,
right,
as opposed to loud thumping music. So,
see, as Nick has said, many times. I don't know if he said. I think he says it at the end of the book. It was a job to him. It was a job. He loved promoting, and so it didn't really matter who. I guess.
Right. Now, okay, I alluded to his photo being in this book earlier. There's a lot of great stories about Johnny Cash. I'm Johnny Cash. So what can you tell us about your working relationship there with Johnny Cash? And it sounds like you were witness to quite the moment in Johnny Cash's personal life.
Well, I got to know Johnny quite a bit through us at Quality. We released an album that featured Johnny Cash, Elvis Presley, and the group at Sun Records.
Oh, the $1 Million Quartet.
So, yeah.
Right.
Carl Perkins and Jerry Lee Lewis are the other two.
And Elvis.
Yeah. Is it Elvis, Jerry Lee Lewis, Johnny Cash, and Carl Perkins?
Yeah.
Okay, that's the $1 Million.
What was it, Roy? Oh my God! Now I want to put a word
I'm gonna have to
in there.
Google
I
it.
have no idea.
And I saw the musical. They did a musical, $1 Million Quartet. I've seen that. So Elvis for sure.
Right.
Okay. Carl Perkins, I'm pretty sure.
Okay.
I feel if Johnny Cash is there, why do I think Jerry Lee Lewis is the fourth?
Well, I think he is because I've seen a picture of Jerry
maybe
Lee
Roy
at the
Orbison
Keys.
shows up and then he doesn't get invited or something.
I don't know.
Here, so keep telling me your story about Johnny Cash while I Google who the heck.
So with Johnny, I presented them with the album, and I ended up having a young photographer take some pictures. Carl Perkins and Johnny picked me up like a surfboard and held me in the air. And of course, I was looking for the pictures the next couple of days when we find out that the young photographer belonged to London YMCA darkroom photography club. And for whatever reasons, the film went missing. So somebody still got the film out there, but I never did see the pictures. And of course, that was the night that Johnny proposed to June Carter.
Yeah, don't bury that lead. Don't bury that lead. Okay, well, first let me clarify that I am correct. It is Elvis Presley, Jerry Lee Lewis, Carl Perkins, and Johnny Cash. So Orbison was not part of the $1 Million Quartet.
Only my imagination, clearly.
But he is involved. He was there. He was there. He was like a past member, I think, class of 55. But this is a 56 recording that we're talking about, I think. So he was like part of that group, but wasn't there in 56. So.
And to tie that all back, that was the record Nick was promoting when it came out.
Oh, yes, $1 Million Quartet. And that's 1981, I think. I believe there's 17 tracks on this thing. You can.
Wait, it's weird. Nick and I went over this. He insists that there was a version of it that came out in the 70s because that's when he was with Quality. I think of Quality. It's hard to,
Yeah, well, okay, so I mean, I wouldn't doubt Nick for a second, especially because I know he's on this call. But 82, okay, I don't know. 82 is when the Survivors Live. There's so many different variants here.
There are. But, I did exactly what you were doing when I was writing the fact checking the book.
Right, but there is this release that I keep reading about does come out in 81. So if something came out in the 70s, I'm not too sure what that was. But regardless, you were there. I don't want to bury this lead here. So Nick, you were literally there when Johnny Cash proposed to June Carter in his hometown, right?
Right. He was managed by Saul Hollow, who was the London manager. And it all caught us off guard, but it was a joyous night. And of course, the movie version of it shows him on stage on a grand stage as opposed to a cold hockey arena.
That goes back to the man who shot Liberty Valance. Print the legend. Okay.
You're right, Mike. Okay,
see, I could have co-wrote this book.
Okay, Nick, you gotta start saying yes. There's a huge hall with red curtains and everything.
Print the legend, right? No, I like the real talk. I want the authentic stories.
Absolutely.
So that's why Nick is here. Okay, we mentioned some big bands here today, but you know what's a bigger band than all these bands? I would say the Rolling Stones. Nick, what can you tell me about your involvement with the Rolling Stones, and anything you can tell me about the infamous arrest of Keith Richards in, what was it, 1977?
Well, the Rolling Stones involves about a 6-month period of time during their bust that I end up meeting Ronnie Wood and Mick Jagger and Keith Richards at Thunder Sound. They're checking studios out at the time, and Ronnie Wood invited me back up to the hotel. When I got to the hotel, I noticed that Keith Richards' son, Marlon, who was about 7 years old, was there playing with a Dungeons and Dragons type of game. So I kind of joined in because I had a son about that age at that time. And down the road, I ended up getting some tickets. We were supposed to take Keith, Anita Pallinger, and Marlon to see a show by the great Ravine, who was a hypnotist, magic man at the Elegant Theater. Well, of course, Keith was passed out. I had to wake up Anita to get her ready, and we ended up going to see the show, arriving late, making everybody having to get up for us to get to our seats. And halfway through the performance, I hear a snort over to the side, and it's Anita with Ronnie Wood's silver straw doing a line, and she yells over to me, "Do you want to snort too, Nick?" Wow, everything is dead silent.
Wow.
So of course they end up having to trying to find drugs for Keith, keep him occupied.
Wow.
And I ended up setting up Lance Irwin, who was Keith's kind of runner boy, to provide Keith with drugs.
Yeah, like Lance took care of the heroin, and then you set up a connection with some people in Toronto with Lance, wasn't it? I think it was, yeah.
Yes.
Where they put under a carpet at this house on Spadina Road, and then they go by, pick up the stuff, leave the money, and yeah.
Wow. So Keith could get his get his supply. Okay. Remind those who are a bit young to remember the details. What was the arrest of Keith Richards about again? I know this does result in a lot of like famous Toronto rock and roll stories, but what happened with the arrest of Keith Richards, and were you there?
No, I was actually on my way from London to Toronto, and they got busted. And that was because they found some traces of heroin in Keith's luggage, in Anita's luggage.
Yeah, then after they found that at the airport, then they busted them at the hotel. I think it was like a day later, wasn't it, Nick? And that's when the big charges were laid. And if you read the book, well, and I hope you all read the book, but if you read the book, you'll see that officially Pearson Airport wasn't part of Toronto, so they were charged under a different area through a different thing. So anyway, it became an RCMP thing ultimately, I think.
Right. Well, he credits it. I believe Keith credits it with saving his life, doesn't he? Doesn't he clean up after this incident?
Yeah. He referred to the young woman who helped him there as his blind angel.
Wow.
Yeah, and she was the one who, and this is also in the book in a different chapter. She basically, the judge was in a quandary as to how do you deal with this, because Keith wasn't he wasn't trafficking it. It was just possession. So, and yet he was so high profile, and then somehow someone. I think this, as he says, his blind angel, called up the judge or got the judge's attention and said, what if he does a concert for the blind?
Right.
And then that was like the perfect solution for the judge and everything.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay, Nick, this is your chance to catch your breath because, and I should have done this earlier, but here we have this guy here with me, some guy named Bob. Bob, and I always
Klanick.
Klanick.
It's okay.
I know. I always feel like there's another syllable in there. Isn't that funny? So Bob Klanick. Maybe a little bit of background. Like, you don't just get up one day at your age and say, I'm going to write the book about Promo Man because he's got great stories. Like, tell us a bit about your background. Like, who the hell are you, Bob?
By the way, imitating my parents will get you nowhere. But still, anyway, no, I grew up in Thunder Bay. I was a music obsessive. I started writing for a little magazine in Thunder Bay when I was 15, and then the student paper there. And I went to them when I was like 16, and I said, "Can I write for you guys? You have a paper here," because I was looking for some place to write for, and the student paper took me on, even though I wasn't a university student, and I was just started there. Went on to write for reviews and lots of features, interviews for a number of London-based magazines, and I've done a couple of, 3-4 Juno Award juries, and Polaris Music Award for a couple of years, and now I'm on the Polaris Heritage Prize Music Award.
So you were a juror for the Polaris Music Prize,
yes,
and now you're a member of the Polaris Heritage Prize jury.
Yes.
Amazing. Yeah. Okay, so you're the real deal, Bob, and I'm glad that Nick met you and that you could capture these stories. Because again, we got a few more stories here to go, but I want to tell people this. Maybe you tell them where to go. Where to go if somebody says I got to read, because we're touching on 10 or a dozen stories.
Right.
There's hundreds in here. Like it's every page is another wow. This is right up my alley. Like, how would somebody get a copy of Promo Man?
Well, if you live in Toronto, and I'm going to presume that at least some of your listeners live in Toronto.
Most of them live in the GTA, yes.
Okay. Sonic Boom, they're carrying it. And they just ran out of copies, so I'm dropping off 5 more today.
Okay.
I'm going in. And Sonic Boom, and of course, if you want to, it's also available on Amazon.
Okay.
And I just found out, too, that the book has been, the London Public Library liked it so much, they recommended it to be sold by a company that distributes to libraries across Canada. So
that's cool.
It might be in a library near you before you actually get a chance to buy a copy. And as I said, it's also on Amazon.
And there's promomanbook.com is your domain there. Yeah. And Nick, how do you feel knowing that people are now reading your stories? Like forever, I guess you had to take you out for like a beer or a coffee or something or for dinner to get these stories, and now we can all just read these stories. How does that make you feel?
Well, that's great because it's a little bit of history that, of course, it's a different angle. Everybody thinks that if you're a roadie or you're doing promo, that you're a groupie or whatever, they don't realize that they're all jobs. So basically, you don't get attached to any particular group. You work what the label wants you to work, to the radio stations, and the thing you want to do is get sold out concerts and guaranteed airplay and guaranteed sales.
Right. You know, it's a job, so you don't play favorites, but if you had your choice, you'll take a Liberace over a Bill Cosby every day of the week and twice on Sundays.
Right.
All right, let's talk about the woman who was known as Eileen Twain. Eileen, I heard she changed her first name. What could you tell us about Eileen Twain?
Well, Eileen Twain ended up coming up to Deerhurst to do an audition. We, at that time, I was doing public relations for the resort and part of the entertainment committee. So she ended up auditioning for us, and it was during the period that Deerhurst then was being sold to Apotex Drugs, Barry Sherman's company.
Right.
So Eileen's manager was able to bring up a lawyer from Nashville that was impressed with Eileen's rendition of Somewhere Out There, Somewhere Over the Rainbow, and ended up getting her a deal with Mercury. So before she left, she ended up disbanding the Vegas show and talked to Apotex and giving her $2 million to build a Broadway show that lasted about 6 weeks before she went out to Nashville, and it was Nashville where she met up with Mutt Lange.
Right.
And of course, changed the name from Eileen to Shania.
And the rest is history. There's a success story for you. By the way, any leads? Who took the lives of Barry and Honey Sherman? Do you have any idea?
Yeah, I'm waiting for that news to break.
Well, Kevin Donovan in the Star had a recent piece about how the police butchered this investigation pretty badly. So I'm not sure we'll ever get a resolution on this one, which is unfortunate.
I think whoever solves it is not going to be in the police force. They're going to be someone just that because the police are probably too embarrassed.
Well, Kevin has not that he would publish, but he's in his experience investigating this, he's got a name. That's all I'll say. Yeah,
he does.
So, he's got a name. So. Okay. I won't say that name because I don't want to hear from any lawyers. Okay. Fun fact, in the 2010 Olympics, I think Alex Bilodeau, I believe, won gold, and that was the first time in 3 different Olympics that Canada hosted that we actually won gold. We did not win gold in Montreal in 76. We did not win gold in Calgary in 88. Why the hell am I dropping this fun fact in a music episode? Because one of the highlights for me watching the 88 Olympics was Eddie the Eagle, and I'm wondering if Nick has any stories about Eddie the Eagle.
Well, Eddie the Eagle, we discovered through his publicity that he was getting about being the skier arriving from England with an old pair of skis and an old ski helmet and whatever.
Right.
So we ended up teaming up with him and renaming our Vegas girls the Eaglettes, and they cheered him on in his jumping. Plus, he caused a near riot at the Glenmore Inn where we were performing because the public wanted to meet him.
Yeah.
And he was almost to the point where he was becoming an embarrassment to the British ski team.
I remember Eddie the Eagle Mania, and now I know who to blame. It's Promo Man's fault.
Well, then, Nick, also, you called up your old buddy Liberace's manager down in L.A.
Yes, Seymour Heller, yes, of course, to arrange a shot for Eddie the Eagle on the Johnny Carson show, which we ended up getting him on.
Oh.
Yeah, that was really amazing.
That's why you're Promo Man. There can only be one. Okay. Now, again, there's hundreds of stories in the book. I'm just covering a few that I jotted down because they captured my fancy, but there are many great stories in this book. But on the back of the book, there's these interesting quotes. I see FOTM Rob Bowman is on the back of the book, but the very first one, and Paul Myers, who's also an FOTM, by the way. So you're in good company. Okay, yeah, he for sure.
Paul's
Come on, he's from the Gravelberries. Were you kidding me?
Paul's an old friend. We've known him for years. So great guy.
And he gets this show. He gets it. And if I ever need to do a deep dive into Kids in the Hall, I know who to call. It's going to be
absolutely.
It's going to be Paul Myers. Or Pull My Ears, as he calls himself on Twitter. Okay, so why am I talking about the back of the book? Because we just lost the Hawk. And the very first quote on the back of the book from Ronnie Hawkins, not to be confused with Lowest of the Lows Ron Hawkins, who will close this show, but Ronnie Hawkins, the quote is, "This is about you, Nick. I hope you're sitting down. This is a lot of praise you're going to get." But he says, "He was the best record hustler I've ever seen." What can you tell me, Nick, about the late, great Ronnie Hawkins?
Well, the Hawk loved London, started playing here back in the early 60s and made London basically his second home to the point where he invested in properties in London, had a club called Campbell's, was expropriated by the city of London, and ended up taking a piece of property that was a former city hall in London. He opened a restaurant with one of the Eton boys called Johnny Finebones, and a club upstairs called the Hawk's Nest. So I had a great opportunity to get to know Ronnie personally and hang in, and we became very close and dear friends. And of course, at 87 and passing away, I can only say that, Ronnie, I'm amazed that 87 was your closing year, because he could have been gone at 67. So he definitely led a great lifestyle, but one that could have led him to an early demise. But he outlived all the speculative reasons. And, he got quite the send-off the other day.
he himself was a master storyteller, because although I never shared a room with him to hear his stories, but my buddy Freddie P would talk about being at the compound and getting the stories. And even if it's just about, the John Lennon long distance phone bill or whatever, like these are just some great stories you get from Ronnie Hawkins. And it's interesting you mentioned, because he lived to a nice old age, and which is awesome. But another guy though, we talked about him earlier, and then you told a story, but I don't know at the time, if somebody had told you back in 1977 that Keith Richards will make it into his 80s, what would you have said? I'm legit curious what you would have said if I told you that in 1977.
Yeah, it would have been shocking to me.
And here he's still going strong, still going strong, so he'll outlive us all.